So if you're struggling with something, if you're listening right now and you're like, oh, I didn't follow at all what you said, listen to it again, listen to it a third time, go read it, go pick it up.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think people know you. They know you definitely as all the great content and information that you're producing. But like, what does that environment look like when you're being thrown into? Talk about the space that you're in. You said you went from 8 units, now you're transitioning to bigger units. What is the biggest terminologies that you had to get familiar with, or an understanding of how the model works, and where did you get plugged in initially, and to get the ball rolling?
So it's tough, right? There's so many terms that you need to learn and pick up, like cap rate's a big one that people don't understand. Just very quickly, it's, if you were to buy a deal all cash, that's what percent return you would make per year. Where people get confused though is cap rates are used in the opposite way to figure out the value of a building, right? So just like any formula, if you have, X equals Y divided by Z, you can move those letters around to find different variables. So for that first one, I said, if you buy $1 million building that produces $100,000 in net operating income, so income after expenses, that's a 10% cap rate. You can also do the opposite, where if it makes $100,000 and you want a property that makes you 10%, you would then pay $1 million. So people have a tough time understanding that math behind it. But once people get through it a couple times, hear it a couple times, and pick it up, it becomes pretty second nature. So a lot of it is just getting through all the terminology. So if you're struggling with something, if you're listening right now and you're like, oh, I didn't follow at all what you said, listen to it again, listen to it a third time, go read it, go pick it up, play around with the math a little bit, either by writing it down or on an Excel sheet. And, it's not as intimidating as it can sound. So it's little terms. I got way more familiar with like profit and loss statements, obviously, like I took accounting back in college, but, student athlete, just kind of coasted through it, didn't really stick. So I was relearning some of that stuff. Learned about like variance reports. So comparing your, whenever you buy a property, you project out what your income and expenses are going to be. So now it's looking at, okay, did we meet those expectations? More often than not, you missed, because your net, you can't project to a T what it's going to be. So it's how much did we miss by? Was it impactful? Was it not? Things like that, really. And then you pick up, little tips and tricks like, the 50% expense rule is often a great way to quickly calculate buildings' income and expenses. You pick up little things like, a lot of people want to see a 1% rule or a 2% rule, depending upon where you are, which is your monthly rent divided by the cost per unit. So if the 1% rule would be 2,000 average rent, $200,000 per unit. That doesn't necessarily really apply when you get into the bigger stuff, but just little things you pick up. So, it's a lot of that stuff. And then you just learn about different types of debt. You learn about equity, investor raising. We could do a whole show on different terms.
Absolutely.